want to thank BNN for hosting the program here. Great studio, great set. I want to thank Hal Shurtler for joining me this evening. Hal is the director of Camp Constitution. Hal, thanks for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me on, Chuck.
Hal, we're live, and this is a current events program, so I want to get right off the bat with what's going on in the news. The big issue today, of course, is the rioting going on in Charlotte, North Carolina, as we speak. There was a young man that was shot by the police, and in a sense, regardless of what actually happened, and I think it's becoming more clear by eyewitnesses that he had been wielding a gun, and that, you know, putting myself in the position of the police, you know, you feel like your life is threatened. So they probably unfortunately did the right thing, or at least they defended themselves. Nevertheless, there is this reaction that I don't quite know how to put the two things together, because what you have as a reaction to this event, as tragic as it is the destruction of predominantly minority businesses.
And property, yes.
You know, you have black and minority businesses, people who have spent possibly their lives building up a business, creating a company, creating a store, creating an entity, creating a home, you know, buying property, trying to live their life, trying to get up in the world.
Providing needs for people in the community, and giving jobs as well.
Of course, and here they are having their businesses looted and burned, and being beaten up, and who knows what else is complete lawlessness. And yeah, it kind of reminds me of what happened in the mid-1960s when you had neighborhoods, predominantly black neighborhoods in cities like Detroit and Newark.
Los Angeles, Watts.
Yeah, even Boston had a little of this, where you had people coming in from the outside, agitators, who were, you know, I don't know if they were paid agitators or what, but they would come in, and in response to an event that very well could have been or might have been or maybe was racist, they engaged in the most racist activity by destroying black businesses. And in that case, they destroyed communities that it took a generation to get back.
That's right.
And I think that I see the same thing happening now in cities like Charlotte and Baltimore and Ferguson, where you have people who
And by the way, Baltimore has a predominantly black population, a black police chief, and I think the police force is, if not majority black, it's a very large percentage of black police officers.
That's right, and it happens that regardless, maybe, you know, regardless of its relevance, the officer in Charlotte that shot this man happened to be black. But putting that aside, you have this group, Black Lives Matter, who it seems to me is a turf group, is a front group for George Soros.
Well,
He's
you follow
financed
the
it.
money. You have
Yes,
always
sir.
follow the money, and you ask yourself, what is this organization doing? If they're out there promoting brotherhood and peace and love and doing something positive to stop violence in general, not just when police may overextend in some cases, but other people too. But it seems to be that that's that one mission, and it seems to be in the wake of that there's always violence. You know, how is that going to solve the problem?
You know, I would think that if they are truly concerned about the welfare and the advancement of the black community, they would be protesting the left, not police officers who, while their mistakes are made, for sure, nevertheless are out there trying to do a job and trying to protect these communities from criminals and violent thugs.
That's right.
And I just want to touch on this a little bit, because when I say protesting the left, it was the left in the 1960s, and this was according to a report written by Lyndon Johnson's Assistant Secretary of Labor, Daniel Patrick Moynihan,
who became senator.
Who became a senator from New York. He was a good liberal, you know, who wrote a report that was read by people in the government, including Johnson, that said that we have to be careful about an aspect of the so-called war on poverty, that to increase welfare is going to lead to not only dependency, but it's going to lead to a disintegration of the family, particularly minority families, because they would be targeted for this program. And that's exactly what happened. What happened was that this federalization of formal charity, welfare, putting people into dependency, not only did it deprive people of their sense of meaning and spirit, but it also rewarded women for getting rid of their husbands and their men, and then rewarded them again for having more children. So you have young...
When you subsidize something, you get more of it.
Right.
And when you tax something, you get less of it.
So, yeah, thank you. So you have children, young men particularly, growing up in fatherless households or households where the father's not present.
And that's not unique to the black community.
No, not at all.
You know, it's all over.
But they were particularly targeted for these programs by groups like Acorn.
That's right.
And other leftist groups who actually would go there and recruit, try to help people get on welfare. And so the result was a disintegration of the black family. And that combined with the anti-capitalist attitude of the left, that business is bad, profit is bad, entrepreneurialism is bad.
Private property, single-family homes are bad. You know.
That's right. And the discouragement of business in these cities by these corrupt liberal democratic governments, like in Detroit. You have young black men coming from fatherless families who have nothing to do. You know, I mean, it's like a...
By the way, I've been to Detroit numerous times, and I would say about 25% of the buildings are abandoned in a city that once was the showcase of the United States.
That's right.
You know.
I mean, it's a good example of what happens when liberal Democrat governments run a show for many, many decades like they've done there.
Let me give a little anecdote. I visited
Yeah.
the Motown Museum. The
Okay.
Motown, that was a free market the founder, Barry
Gordy. Yeah.
he borrowed money from his family members. The sister that wouldn't give any money became the accountant.
Mm-hmm.
And then for a few $1,000s, within a few years, they're making millions.
Oh, sure.
And the young man was the actual building where the first studio was.
Hitsville.
Hitsville,
Yeah.
incredible place. Small, very small, little
Right.
in the neighborhood. And he said that they used to love to hire the Motown talent because they were clean cut. They were, you know, people loved their
Fantastic image.
talented. He said that they had a gig in New Orleans in a hotel. It was owned by a white man, and they broke the contract. He said, "No, we don't want you because you're black. You know,
Right.
we don't want black people." And, well, they just said, "Okay, fine." 2 years later, or a few years later, they bought the hotel, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And then they were being stoned by some Klansmen when they'd bust through, it was Alabama, I think. And what did they do? The young man who gave the tour, he said, they just simply shot at them, and they stopped shooting at them. You know,
That's right.
They were armed. you see.
Exactly. They knew
I
how
don't
to-
think he was trying to make a case for the Second Amendment, but, you know, when you're armed, the bullies kind of back off. you
Oh,
see.
absolutely.
And
I
it
mean,
showed
that
a
was the
free
case.
market in how the free market worked, and it worked for everybody.
And
in
it
spite
worked,
of discrimination.
And it worked, and I would say that today, more than half of the black population is in the middle class, lower middle class, upper middle class, and wealthy, in spite of these leftist programs which tried to, in a sense, use black people as cannon fodder in their revolution.
No.
They also destroyed the black church in a certain way, going all the way back to the days when Margaret Sanger put
Yes.
abortion
Oh,
clinics
yes.
in Harlem and paid off black ministers to encourage young black women to go to the clinic. Because
She actually had something, they called it the Negro Project.
The
That was
Negro
the term
Project,
that was used. It was a-
1939, yeah.
And the goal was to get black ministers to promote abortion and birth control.
That's right.
And-
her motivation was she wanted to annihilate the black race.
That's right. In fact,
And
there's...
in fact, she had Nazi psychologist
Ernest
Dr.
Rudin.
on her
That's right,
as a
right.
columnist in her magazine, and
That's
she
right.
talked about
Birth Control Review.
yeah, race theory and
Yep.
just genic races and all of the rest. So that was the beginning of the
And by the way, there's a great website, it's called Planned Parenthood, that hopefully
Mm-hmm.
listeners who are like to do some research will verify what we're saying here.
oh yeah, no, there's been a book
Yeah.
about it by was it George
Yes, the legacy,
the
Grand
great
Grand
angel.
Illusion, I think it was, yeah.
There's been a lot of research.
George
on
Grant is the author
George
of that,
Grant,
yeah.
And then the third spoke in the wheel was the fact that, so they destroyed, they worked to destroy the black family, the black church, black faith, black education with their look-say methods. I mean, the late Dr. Samuel
Sam
Blumenfeld,
Blumenfeld, that's
has
right.
written a shelf of books on this.
He
How they-
actually, back in the 80s, he wrote he dedicated one of his newsletters called The Making of the Black Underclass. And he said by the 1930s, the literacy rate in the black community was extremely high.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it was 80 and 90%. You know, back in the 1860s, it was much smaller. They made incredible inroads. They were making economic inroads. And then, all of a sudden, by the 60s...
Well, Sam points out that the getting rid of phonics in schools, and here we have black families without the father, so there's a lot of, you know, if you know what it's like to be a single-parent family, you don't have as much time to focus on your child's education.
right.
So they're really more victimized by these schools taken over by the quote-unquote progressive
Yes, the
educators.
progressive whites, by the way.
Exactly.
And by the way, let me make a plug for the Waite House in Roxbury.
Sure.
Are you familiar with the group?
No.
You should have them on your show.
I will.
We are all in this together. And they've been around for about 30 years. And they remediate adults. And guess what they use at this school?
Phonics.
They use Sam Blumenfeld's
Alpha
Yeah,
Phonics.
yeah.
Yeah, Sam has spent his life dedicated to exposing this fraud.
How many
and
times did he sit in his seat?
Several.
Several times,
In fact,
yeah.
Sam was a guest on the show, unfortunately, a few weeks before he passed away.
Yeah.
And the replacement of phonics with the look-say guessing, not only did it lead to illiteracy, and that particularly affected the minority community, but it led to other social ills. Sam documents this.
Dyslexia.
He quotes, and he quotes from respectable sources, Harvard professors who've said this. And so we have this kind of leftist agenda that has completely compromised the black community, and in spite of that, they've done well. And then finally, and not to mention the fact that the increase in violence from liberal judges who let criminals out
That's right.
and who favor the criminal over the victim. You have an unemployed men, you have them getting involved in drugs and violence. And the last people left to, in a sense, protect anyone are the police.
Mm-hmm.
And now there's a war against the police.
Yep.
I mean, I'm not suggesting that there aren't occasionally a rogue police.
There are a bad cop, but there are bad everybody.
That's right. But for the most part, their record, I mean, I've come to respect them more from some of these instances when you actually look into them and you find out what really happened.
Well, just think about it. In my job, I meet the best people. I get a call, I'm meeting someone. You're a policeman, you get a call. You're usually meeting someone who's doing something wrong, a crime.
Right.
So they're dealing with that day in and day out. It's a very tough job.
It's a very tough, you wake up in the morning, you don't know if you're going to come home.
That's right.
They go into the very heart and the epicenter of the danger, and they're protecting predominantly minority communities.
That's right.
From violence, because you have 99% of the people there are trying to get on with their life, trying to run their businesses,
Exactly.
try to go to work, and you've got them protecting them from drug dealers and violent gang members and criminals. So now they're under assault by the left predominantly.
By the left, yep.
Who are using race
And the
to divide
goal
people up
is a
also.
national police force. It's always
Yeah.
stems, Al Sharpton was calling. Now, I know he didn't create that. That's something that has been going on for years. And in fact, you can look at back in the 1940s when the Communist Party USA came out with 100 things we need to do to take over the country. And one of them was a national police force. If it's not completely national, it's controlled. So they may still have Boston police or Cambridge police, but the guidelines and the training is stemming from Washington, D.C.
And that's something that's, it's in the congressional record, the Communist Goals.
That's
It
right.
was introduced in the early 1960s. And
That's right.
Yeah, one of their goals was a nationalized police force.
Now, this is what they'll do. I mean, most policemen live in the community they serve. That's why I think it's a regulation or rule that you have
That's
to live
right.
in Boston. Sometimes they skirt around that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it's likely that the policemen are going to go out and causing trouble. But a national police force, you're a bad cop in Louisiana, they're going to send you to Boston, so is that what you really want?
This is what the hallmark of an authoritarian
That's right,
socialist
exactly.
regime. I mean, the Nazis had the Gestapo, the Soviets had the Cheka. This is a nationalized police
But
force.
keep in mind,
one
it's-
of the things that's made this country different in a way from other countries is that we've never resorted to that. Our policing has always been local.
Local.
And traditionally, the highest law enforcement official in the land is the county sheriff.
That's correct,
Who's
yeah.
elected.
That's right.
And that there's no, I mean, the FBI was created by the Wilson administration mainly as an investigative unit, not as a policing unit.
That's exactly
They
right.
can
yeah.
help local policemen with intelligence and information, for sure. But this is something else. This is giving them police power. And in fact, not just the Obama administration, but it goes back several. I think it goes back probably to Bush #1.
And they're Republican. It's not
The
like, we're
Republicans
not
are-
here to bash
this is-
Democrats. It's the
yeah, the
Republicans
Republicans
and
are
Democrats.
almost as
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah.
That there is in a sense, a militarizing of federal agencies. That they're all having their own private police departments. Even, I think, the post office
They-
has a militarized arm
Well, of
now.
course, I used to work at the post office when one of my coworkers did try to shoot the place up.
Okay.
But they do
Well,
have a
that's-
postal police. They've had that for years.
Yeah, but they're becoming more professional and more armed.
Yeah.
They're getting hardware, they're getting training. You've
What's
got the
worse-
IRS has a.
What's worse
pretty
than
well-
that is that the federal government is making military equipment available to police departments all over the country. Keene, New Hampshire is a small college town.
Right.
You know, it doesn't have a whole lot of crime. They got a couple of somewhat half tracks, you know.
Although they do have some problems with their college.
They do.
But that's
Well, but
another
it's not-
story. Of course.
It's not,
I mean, one of the things we learned from Ferguson, that's a lesson that's overlooked, is that in response to the shooting of Michael Brown, the police came out with what looked like Beirut.
Yes.
You know,
yeah.
I mean, you had like smoke bombs and you had high-tech military equipment.
Well, look at the
I mean,
marathon
it was
bombing in Boston.
totally out of proportion.
The marathon bombing in Boston, this is an example of the police state. Now, the two men involved, there's a lot of unanswered questions, but look at what did Alinsky say? The action isn't a reaction, right?
Right. Mhm.
Shelter in place, hide.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Two guys can do a lot of damage, I grant you that. But one of them was dead, one of them was wounded, and they shut the whole, not just the city, but the greater Boston down.
Oh, yeah, I remember it. I was
And
inside.
Yeah, well, I was out and about, you see, and I was in Lexington that day, you know,
Yeah.
and I was I thought when I heard the news, I thought there were just these cells erupting all over the city,
Oh, yeah.
and I thought,
You know, that might have been like a little experiment in
I
how
think
to
so.
almost for a day declare martial law.
and how the average citizen would respond.
And
most
that's
of them-
how it felt. I know we had people calling us and what was this like? And,
Yeah.
You know, it was very, very strange.
I remember driving to East Boston, Logan Airport. It was a Friday,
Mm-hmm.
Friday morning, rush hour traffic. It was like Sunday, you know, a Sunday morning. There wasn't anyone on the road. And I see these signs, you know, these on the shelter in place. I said, what the heck's that supposed to mean? Like, go and hide somewhere.
Right.
What about, hey, guys, if you're armed, let's go out and find these guys and bring them to justice, you know?
Now you've opened the door here to another topic, which I want to
It's
get
funny
into.
how, you know, but one thing,
It
you know, it's all
segues
leads
in.
to another.
Oh, yeah,
you know?
this
They all
segues right,
dovetail, you know?
right into the events of just a few days ago, where you had bombs that were very similar to the ones
The ones
placed at
here,
the
yeah.
marathon.
Yeah, low tech,
With these, you know, kind of like a, you know, pressure cooker.
pressure
and,
cooker, yeah.
You know, putting it into a crowded area to kill innocent people. And thank God it didn't go off, but we also, it's not related, but it is related, that in St. Cloud, Minnesota, you had a guy stabbing people and yelling Allah Akbar.
Sort of at random, yeah.
It's another Allah Akbar killing. This, putting aside the question of, you know, I mean, all American citizens have a right to believe what they want and to due process. But under the circumstances, I don't understand why it is that the government is welcoming in tens of thousands of refugees from countries that are
Hostile.
presently torn by jihadic terror. And when you have the FBI director, James Comey, President Obama's FBI director, telling us that it is really impossible to screen these people and find out if they are friends or foes, and that this is a war. You know, we are involved in, it's an international war by jihadists. And at a time like that, to be therefore saying, well, I mean, I've had people say this to me, it's only like 2%.
That's right.
I don't care. I mean, 2% of 10,000
Let's change it. Let's say that
is more people than took down the airplanes on 9/11.
let's say that instead of being jihadists, that they had a communicable disease,
Right.
and they couldn't tell that, you know, we couldn't screen them. They wouldn't let any of them in, right? Now you look at the Constitution. Constitution says Congress makes the policy of immigration. We have the best immigration policy in the world. We have more people come in this country every year legally than all the nations combined.
Sure.
You try to immigrate from Syria to Mexico, see how tough it is, right? Or if you try to sneak in from the southern border of Mexico, they'll shoot you, right?
They have a wall.
Right, they'll shoot you.
That's right.
Not only that, but at one time, they used to, before you could immigrate, you had to make sure you would not be dependent of the state.
Right. So you got to have a charge.
You had to have a relative or a
Yeah.
friend that would make sure that they would take care of you. And then you had a process where you would learn the language. If you become a U.S. citizen, then you had to renounce all of your former allegiances to your former. Not the culture is one thing. You can still love your former country and, you know, a culture within a culture. But as far as that, I am no longer an Italian. I'm an American.
Right,
You know?
of course.
I'm Italian background or English background or what have you. You see.
Right.
But that's not the issue anymore. But the other thing is Congress has to make sure is the interest of the American people must come first, the safety and well-being. And if it's unfortunate there are some Syrian refugees who need a place, I'm sorry, we can't bet you. It's not
Well, the thing
our
is that
job
we
to let
can-
everybody in this country either.
We can help people without bringing them here.
That's right. That's right.
I mean, we can help them there. Or we
Well-
can help them by asking, for example, why it is that Muslim countries are not welcoming them in. I mean, with the one exception of Jordan, which is.
Jordan is,
You
yeah.
have, like Saudi Arabia, they're not welcoming any
None.
refugees. There was like, I think you might have seen this on television, this image of like a whole tent city with empty tents. I mean, this is one of the richest countries in the world.
In the world, that's right.
And they will not welcome in Muslim refugees from Syria or from anywhere else. In fact, none of the Muslim countries will. Central Asia is another one.
Turkey, how about Turkey?
Turkey and I mean, Central Asia, these are wealthy countries. They've got huge oil and resources and land. They could actually benefit from having an influx
a young
of
labor
people.
force, right?
Yeah. But they will not let them in. And instead, and maybe I'm getting a little on the tin hat part of this, but I'm going to say this.
But some things are pretty obvious, though. I mean, what is the purpose of this?
Well, that's what I'm about
To
to say.
destabilize our country?
It's and putting aside our purpose, which might be that, there's also an element of Islam that calls for peaceful conquest. It's like civilizational jihad. Rather than going in with a bloody war, you go in with people, and so they want to go into Europe, and they want to go into the United States, and they want to raise the population of Muslims in these countries. So eventually, this is part of the religion. Now, I'm not saying anything here that's not, that they're not open about. I mean, this is in the Quran. It's part of the it's documented that the idea is to create a one world under the scimitar.
Caliphate, a
Yeah, the
caliphate.
caliphate.
Yeah.
I mean, this is, and this is why they're not going into Muslim countries. They're going into non-Muslim countries so that they can, I mean, at some point, like they say in England today, there are more people attending mosque than Church of England.
Yes. Well, in Western Europe has a negative birth rate. It's had a negative birth rate for many, many years.
Right.
It has a very small amount of, you said, the churches are empty. So there's a big loss of faith. They've embraced the state, socialism. That's why I was very surprised when they left, Great Britain left the European Union. That was a
Oh,
really...
that's amazing. We could talk about that.
Yeah, that was a
incredible.
wonderful thing. That was wonderful to see. But you have a negative you have a zero growth population, but you have a socialist state. Well, how are you going to maintain that? You have to bring in young people to support the retired people. And if your replacement level is less than one, or less than what the average couple is having very few children, how are you going to be able to take care of that? So you have to bring in these young people who will work to pay into the system, that take care of the retired people. And I think maybe economically they say, well, these terrorism are just negative externalities. This is what we have to do, and we have to suck it up.
I think we recently saw John Kerry off the record. He was speaking in a foreign country, and he said, let's not report on this. Let's not report when these things happen.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's downplay it.
Yeah.
And we know the New York Times has downplayed the increase in honor killings, where young women are slaughtered because they're out with a man or
Or
something.
to get makeup on, or
Yeah, it was-
someone's looking at them the wrong
Exactly.
way. Yeah, yeah.
And the New York Times doesn't mention the
And
fact
these are
that
family members that are doing it.
Oh, I know,
Yeah.
brother
They
or
throw acid
father.
in their faces or some cases.
Yeah, and they don't mention the fact that they're Muslim.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Oh, so
this
it was
is-
in Nice just recently. A truck kills 34 people. Well, I'll tell you what, there's a lot of vehicles out on Washington Street as I was coming in, and the ones that were parked don't bother anybody. It's people behind the wheel that's the problem, you see. But a truck
That's
kills
right.
34 people.
Okay, I'm getting a signal that we're going to a break pretty soon, or a little while. So anyway, but the fact is that given all of these facts, and given the fact that Sharia civilization is really contradicting our American values. We don't believe in honor killings. We don't believe in polygamy and child brides and beheading homosexuals, where they do.
That's an interesting thing, too, is you see that, like the Unitarians, you'll see the rainbow flag, and you'll see, we love our Muslim brothers.
Yeah.
You have nothing gets compatible with
Well,
Muslims.
the Unitarians will be the first people they'll kill.
Yeah, except that they probably don't like Trinitarian Christians. That's probably the only thing, the common enemy maybe,
Maybe, but
Yeah.
the point is that it's either incredible stupidity and naivete,
Or a death wish?
or it's the same people that supported Stalin and Lenin and Mao and every other communist dictator
Yeah.
in history, when they were like slaughtering millions of their own people, and they were like seeing them as part of a greater entity. So I think that they make common cause with Islam because of its world order aspirations.
Mm-hmm.
This is a world-conquering faith that's also a political and military movement
That's right. That's right.
that wants to physically conquer the planet. That's what communism is. So they make common cause, I think. I think that there's, and they also share a hatred of the United States.
That's right, yeah.
They certainly hate Jews. I mean, I try to tell my fellow Jewish Americans that to let these people, and these are the worst anti-Semites than the Nazis. I mean, what are they, crazy? I mean, the synagogues now have to have guards when you go there. That wasn't the case maybe
Well, the
even
church
5 years ago.
the church that my family and I attend, I was asked if I would be willing to come in as come in armed. I said,
Exactly.
Yeah, you'll have to, But
You, and you do, and there were
Yeah.
threats, real
Yeah.
threats, where, that the police are telling synagogues about. So, I mean, this is what we're doing to our country. And this is supposed to be humane. I mean, as I mentioned, I mean, if someone is in trouble in a foreign country, we can do a lot to help them. The American people are the most generous people
And it also
in
should
history.
be private relief entities, not government, because government
Right.
to government, it's always been part of the problem.
But even the government, I mean, that's we can debate that. The point is that American people have been the most generous people in history.
That's correct, yeah.
And we don't need to, we could do it there,
That's right.
is the issue. And
I mean, if we
and
brought
yet
every
if you bring this
refugee
up-
in, we would have about 20 billion people in this country.
Well,
We-
that-
and we
that's-
can't, it's
that's
not
a-
sustainable. And
That's
that's not a bad word, although it's used incorrectly, but yeah.
Well, I mean, immigration policy is part of any nation's sovereignty. A nation has a right to decide who comes into the
That's right.
national home in the same way that you and I have a right to decide who comes into our private home.
Exactly right.
It's natural.
Yeah, yeah.
That's why you have sovereign nations. You don't have to explain. I don't have to explain why I'm not welcoming some neighbor into my home. I have a right to do that.
That's right. And you have a
That's-
right to, I'm not necessarily in favor of building a big wall. I don't think it's practical.
No, I understand that. But we're going to we're now getting the circle sign, so
All right.
I think that we're going to a brief intermission.
Okay.
We'll switch gears a little bit when we come back and maybe talk about different factors in this election. This is an
A
election
little
year
bit about
after
our
all.
Camp Constitution.
Oh, Camp
Yeah.
Constitution, but you're the director. We could talk,
Yeah.
why don't we come back on that? So.